Hello, book lovers. Welcome to the inaugural episode of our Lit Garden author series. I'm Diane Parrish, your host. I'm the author of a debut novel, Something Better, which came out last October. I'm also the author of a monthly column called Lit Garden on booktrib.com, where I write about wonderful books that you should know about. I'd like to welcome Judy Mandel, our first guest in the series. She's the author of two fabulous memoirs, one Replacement Child, the other White Flag, and both books have to do with grief, addiction, and generational trauma. She's a fabulous writer. I think you're really going to enjoy our conversation. I'm so glad she could join us. Welcome, Judy. Judy, thank you so much for joining me today.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for asking me.
Yeah. You referred to this in your book, but I would love to have you talk with us for people who maybe haven't read the book yet about what prompted you to write it. Why did you feel compelled to tell this story in words for others?
Yeah. Well, my real hope was to start a conversation with people that they might not have had before and maybe give them a different perspective. I think there are probably many, many people going through the same kind of circumstance with loved ones who have substance use disorder. And it's a difficult topic to talk about.
Yeah.
Oftentimes people hide it because of the shame of it, the stigma. And I think opening it up to talk about it in a different way, I was hoping that this book might do that.
Yeah. I noticed you and I have a favorite quote from Joan Didion.
Yeah.
About, she says, I write entirely to find out what I'm thinking, what I'm looking at, what I see and what it means, what I want and what I fear. And the fact that you quoted that makes me think perhaps you write from that same perspective.
No, absolutely. That's absolutely true. Especially firstly, in my first book, Replacement Child, I didn't really understand what that was, and reading and researching and been writing about replacement child syndrome gave me a whole new way of processing my own experience. So writing it through and working it through definitely, changed my perspective and helped me understand even how I felt. And the same with White Flag, understanding especially things like generational trauma, which was one of the things that I tried to explore in White Flag, is something that I didn't know how I felt about that until I did more research and started writing through it. So that's why I really do relate to that quote.
I definitely want to come back to generational trauma. That's a topic that's really interesting to me too. But I wanted to also ask you if you would mind sort of explaining how White Flag comes because of the events that you describe in Replacement Child and how they're connected to each other.
You mean the title and how it relates? You mean
the title and the stories? I mean,
and the story. Well, as I was writing it, the image of White Flag kind of got raised up to me. That it's first of all, it's a battle. So, the white flag kind of speaks to that. And the fact that raising your white flag in surrender is something that I think people that are suffering with substance use disorder need to do before they can get help. They have to say they need help. And that's a surrender in itself. But also for family members like myself, there's only so much you can do. And the surrender and the white flag of, I'm doing the best I can. This is, I have to surrender. I'm not all powerful in that.
You write so beautifully. I mean, you're a beautiful writer, but you write so beautifully about really difficult topics: addiction, grief, loss, denial, surrender. And I wonder, you had a lot of details in White Flag. So were you writing journals while you were living the experience? Did you have that to look back on when you started putting the book together? Or are you just one of those people with an amazing memory? You can keep it all right here.
I don't have an amazing memory, but I'm not a journal person.
Okay.
I've never been a journaler, but I did have a lot of information, a lot of material to work with. I had all of our letters that my niece and I wrote back and forth to each other. So those were all, in writing. And I, of course, since I'm a writer, I saved everything. So for whatever reason, you always save everything. So I saved all those. And I had I did get hold of her cell phone texts also, which was very helpful.
Yeah.
And then I did remember quite a bit. And also I did a kind of video journal for myself when I went to Louisville. So that was helpful also.
Oh, okay. Well, for people who haven't read the book yet, I don't want you to reveal, anything you don't want to reveal, but could you sort of describe what the story is that you tell in White Flag?
Well, I think it's a story of trying to save my niece. And in the midst of her decline into substance use disorder, finding her after 2 years of thinking she was on the street or dead, finding her in prison and being, communicating with her and really trying to save her and understanding, what I could and couldn't do and, trying to research and finally understand what this was all about. I think that's pretty much it.
And for much of this journey, you were completely alone. I mean, you had people who loved you, but you were the person who was out to save her. You pretty much were on your own in that way. That must have been really challenging.
Well, yeah, it was. It was frustrating that others in her life were not stepping up, really, as far as I, can say that, because they were estranged. And it's easy to do. It's very hard to see through the substance use to the person and think about that person as the same person that you love. And because they lie to you and they steal from you and they continually do that. And it's very hard to see through that yes, this is that same, but for me, this is that same little girl that I saw grow up. And it's difficult. So yeah, it was kind of a lonely journey for me.
Yeah. And I thought, you said several times in the book that, not in a mean way, but just as a matter of fact, addicts lie. The addiction lies. They will lie to you.
Sure.
So you're kind of balancing on this seesaw between loving, caring, wanting to save, and trust on the one hand, and on the other hand, knowing this person is lying or this person will lie to me. What's a lie? What's the truth? And how many times do I keep believing what she tells me when I wonder the whole time, is it not true?
Well, I guess it all goes back to trust but verify. If you can. And you have to protect yourself. You can't ignore that fact. You can't. And some people will give up because they can't, go through that. And it is horrible. It's a horrible thing to have to be protective of yourself, but also giving and showing your love, which is, I think, the only way to save anybody. Really.
Yes. And at the same time, showing your love is the only way to save anyone. But the reality is we really can't save anyone. It's kind of up to them to reach the decision that they want to put up the white flag and,
Yeah. That's what I think that's why that symbol meant so much to me, spoke to me, the white flag, that you're right. You can't do it for someone. They have to want it. You have to put things in their path so that if they do want it, there's a way to do it. I think that's the goal. But you're absolutely right. The white flag has to be waved by them.
I know you did so much research on addiction, even apart from the particulars of this personal story. You know a lot about addiction now. And I'm wondering, what were some of the things that really surprised you when you started wanting to learn more, things that you hadn't realized?
I think that the depth of where this comes from and why it might be for individuals was something that I knew sort of intellectually, but not really. That generational trauma can have a part in it. That PTSD can have a part in it. Inherited. Generational trauma is, I think, physically inherited. I believe that from what I've read. I believe that's true. And also, I think the other surprise is that it can be treated and people recover. That's, I think, the biggest, aha moment for me is people do recover. It's not a death sentence. It's people do recover. And especially, I think now there's been a movement more for MAT, they call it medical assisted treatment. And I think that's very hopeful. And it's something that's become more available to people. I hope it remains that way. I'm not quite sure it will, but I hope so.
life-saving. Well, let's talk about generational trauma because we've mentioned it a couple of times. I think it is. I agree with you. I think it is a reality, but I don't really know as much about. I don't know much about it. I really don't know what you know about it. So, can you talk a little bit about what you've learned and why you and I are so convinced it's a real thing?
And I think there are a couple of books that I read that really helped me understand that. Gabor Mate is a doctor. He's not really, I don't think he's a psychiatrist even, but he's worked with addicts for many years, and also he's kind of brilliant. He has this book, In the Realm of the Hungry Ghost. I believe that's the title. I'll have to make sure that's the right title. But that book, and also Bessel van der Kolk's book, The Body Keeps the Score, are two books that have really been revelatory for me, even talking about how generational trauma is visited on, through the generations, that the research that's been done. I won't get too wonky about this, but, the research that's been done with generations of Holocaust survivors and their families. And and I'm not a scientist, so this is layman's terms, but the way genes react is an inherited thing through biologically through generations. So it does have a physical manifestation that's been tested and proved that's the case. Even not just psychologically, which that's also,
right,
part of it too.
Right. Well, I had read a book, this is a slightly different topic, about why Europeans are generally shorter and smaller than Americans. And one of the theories, which that he convinced me, is the generation of Europeans who grew up right after World War II were simply malnutrition. They just couldn't get the quantity of food that they needed to grow to their full, robust height. But it affected not just that generation, it affected their children as well. Even after they did have sufficient nutrition, there was something passed down in the genes between the parent and the child that prevented that child from having the same caloric uptake. And I was thinking, well, isn't that what evolution is? That's how everything has changed. So why would we not think that trauma gets passed down exactly the same way?
That makes perfect sense. I hadn't read about that, but that's so interesting.
Yeah.
It's very interesting.
One of the things I hadn't realized until I read your book, I actually had a misconception that I'm so glad I do not have anymore, was I was puzzled by Narcan because I felt it was wonderful. It was wonderful that it existed, and every life is precious and must be saved. But I also wondered, isn't it also kind of this is not quite right, but a pass? If you OD and you're revived with Narcan, don't you get a false sense of security that, well, this will always save me. I can always, take my chances and Narcan will be there to save me again. But you helped me see that in I was looking at that all wrong. So could you talk a little bit about Narcan?
I guess you could look at it that way. How I look at it is you can't recover if you're dead. And if it gives somebody a chance. It gives them another chance. And in many cases, an overdose that was near fatal is sometimes the wake-up call that people need. Not always, but sometimes. And maybe it will make them take that next step toward recovery. So I'm grateful that they have it.
Oh, absolutely.
And that they use it.
Yes. And can you talk a little bit about some of the new pharmaceutical options for addicts that seem to show a lot of promise, I guess, physiologically and psychologically?
Yeah, there are some new medically assisted treatments that they use. I think the generic name for the most widely used is buprenorphine, which is also known as, the brand name is Suboxone, I believe.
Yeah.
And that's the one that I'm most familiar with. Many people know about methadone, and that is also used to help people. But I know the Suboxone, the buprenorphine, it will not only cut the cravings if they do take the opioids, especially opioids, they won't get high from it. So it negates that as well. Mm-hmm. So that helps them. I don't think it's on its own is something. You need it with therapy and you need other pieces of that treatment. But I think it's been a huge step for people for recovery.
Yeah. So I was very impressed in the book that you're so able to address the topics of guilt and denial from the survivor's point of view. You know, you've to be able to think, I've done everything I can, and yet, that must be a process also.
Yeah. Sure. Did I get rid of the guilt? No, it's still there. And, I have to say it's also a result of, that I am a replacement child. It's part of that whole syndrome type thing. But at some point, you do have to say what you did was the best you could have done at the moment.
Yes.
It's the best you knew, and it's the best you could have done. And it's hard to release that kind of guilt. In many cases, I mean, I still have silly thoughts about things I should have done for my mother when she was, dying. I should have gotten her a better pillow, I mean, you know what I mean? Things like that.
I definitely do know what you mean. Yes, I do.
Things like that you think of, I shouldn't have given her that water or whatever it was. But there are all those second thoughts that you have. And letting go of that's difficult. Writing helps.
Yeah, I would agree. I think writing does help. But I think if you're a thoughtful person and you try to be a good person, I think you can't help but have regrets about things. For me, I was thinking for myself now, sometimes some of the things were things I knew at the time. I need to rise to this occasion better than I'm rising to this occasion. Mm-hmm. And others are things that just hit me out of the blue sometimes. I think, oh, no, I should have done
that.
Instead of why. And it never occurred to me until years later. So I wonder if you have any interest in talking about some of these other motifs that were in the book, which I perceived, in addition to the guilt and denial, management of grief is a part of your book, and forgiveness is a big part of your book. And I found both of those those are also part of my own book, but in general, being a human being, I think those
Yes, I just finished your book. I really loved it. It was really, the characters really stay with you.
So the topic of grief, did you do a lot of objective research about grief? You lived a lot of grief, obviously.
I did. I probably started doing that kind of research when I wrote Replacement Child, which was mostly the grief that parents go through when they lose a child, because my parents lost their daughter. So I did do a lot of research into that. I read some memoirs. I read Freud and, the psychological part of that. And with White Flag, I did also read some memoirs from people that were addicts that recovered, or from families of people who did not recover.
Yeah.
So yes, I did. Yeah, I did do a lot of reading in that way, which was very, very helpful.
Yeah. And the same thing with forgiveness. Are you writing from personal experience there as well?
Well, I'm still working on that.
Aren't we all?
I think it helps. The understanding helps with forgiveness.
Yeah.
And the more I wrote about, my father was the one I needed to forgive. And the more I wrote about what he went through, the more I forgave him for anything, because it was so hard for him. So I think understanding leads to that in many cases.
I definitely think that's true. And it takes effort. It's not something you can just think, gosh, I should really forgive that person, and then you're done. You have to work at it.
Right.
I mean, often we have to work at it.
Right. I agree.
So I'd like to talk a little bit about your writing process, because we'll probably have some writers watching. So what is your writing process?
It's really, I think discipline is the thing. And, I'm saying that now, but I'm not in the midst of a project, but in the midst of a project, I was pretty disciplined with, setting aside that certain amount of time every day to be writing. And, it had to be, the time when you felt most productive. And with my first book, I wrote the scenes every morning. I'd wake up and I'd write a different scene that came to me, or I would go through the last one that I wrote. And it was not sequential. I don't outline, and yeah, I don't do that. I kind of write what I think needs to be in the book and then figure out how that fits together. Yeah, I'm sure you have the same thing, that it's a discipline that you just have to keep doing it.
It is. The new book I'm working on requires some my new book, Judy, is going to have an addiction aspect.
Oh, really?
Yes. And I have to do research as I go. I tend to write the scene as you just described, and then I'll make notes to myself, need to know more about this. Is this accurate? Because I have to.
Right.
I tried to write another book that required a lot of research, and I got so bogged down in the research. I knew a whole lot about the topic, and I didn't have a story to fit all that research in.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to do this one a little bit differently, to write the story and then determine what additional information has to go in it.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm learning about that process.
Yeah. And that's another thing. The organization, I think, is really an important piece of that, because as you're saying, if you do all this research and you don't know where you put it, it's difficult. So I actually did start using for White Flag, a software program that helps.
What did you use?
Which, great, you're going to ask me what it's called. Scrivener. It's called Scrivener.
Oh, a lot of people like Scrivener. I've never tried it.
I don't think I used it to its best advantage, the way they want you to use it, but I used it the way it worked for me.
Yeah.
So, and it helps me, put those pieces of research aside in places I could find them, so that when I needed them, I could pull them up. And the same with quotes and, pieces of.
I should probably force myself to learn that. Kind of intimidating, but
it's it's very helpful. It's very helpful.
Yeah, I can see that it would be. I'm not.
Otherwise, I was having all these different documents, Word documents, with labels that I could maybe sometimes figure out what I meant at the time, but not always.
Right.
It was very, very difficult that way.
Well, even worse, I had a bunch of legal pads with things scribbled on them, and that.
Or the notebooks, right? The notebooks that you carry around. And you got to remember, wait, I wrote a really great thing in that blue notebook.
Was the blue notebook or the red notebook? Yes.
Where did I put that notebook?
That is not the best. Not the best.
But it happens, like if you're traveling or something, you're going to do that anyway. But.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, take a look at Scrivener.
Well, I have had, let me just make sure I've asked the questions I really wanted to get to. One of the questions I wanted to ask you is, what have I not asked? What would you like to talk about that I did not think to ask you today?
I'm not sure.
But that's
some pretty great questions, I think.
Thank you.
And it's really fun to talk about the process too, I think, especially if there's some writers out there. You can have a great idea for a book, but you have to sit down and actually write it.
Yes, do.
It's very true.
There's that.
There's that. I mean, how many times has someone come up to you and said, I have this great idea that you should write for this book? I know often.
Yeah.
You should write it.
You should. That's why I always say, that sounds like a book you should write.
Yeah. Yes. Let's start that.
Well, I have a couple of just fun, silly questions for you. What's your favorite month?
May. It's the month I was born in, and it's always nice and warm, but not too warm. There's flowers out. I like to travel then, if I can. And, yeah, definitely May. What about you?
I love May. I think I'm more of an October person. It's also the weather's also beautiful.
Yeah.
And the colors are beautiful. I didn't used to think October was that great of a month because the flower, my garden was starting to conk out. It didn't look so great. But now, perhaps because I'm getting older, I see the beauty in these flowers a little past their prime.
That makes good sense. And it's still pretty. October's beautiful.
Especially here, this part of the country. It's so
yeah.
Yeah.
I'm in Connecticut also, so.
Oh, me too. So
it's gorgeous here in October.
Yes. But May is lovely. In fact, they wrote a whole song about it for Camelot, right?
Yeah. That's right.
If you had to take only one book on a deserted island and were there by yourself, what would you take?
Oh my gosh. Oh, that's a very difficult question.
I know. Imagine just one book. That's really torture.
That would be terrible.
It would be terrible.
I'd probably take one that I haven't read so that it would make me read it.
Yeah.
I'd take Ulysses because I've never read it.
I've never read it either. That's a great choice.
And that would last a long time.
Yes. Yes.
Of course, if I hated it, I would really be in trouble.
But if you had no choice, you'd probably stop hating it.
Yeah.
Teach yourself.
It would get me through like a long time.
once I had the notion that this might happen to me. Now, why I thought that, I do not know. So I bought the complete works of Shakespeare and this thing that's like this big.
Oh,
That's
yeah, I
kind
have
of-
that.
That's cheating, taking the entire library.
Yeah. That's a good choice, though.
Yes,
I think
I
that's a
guess.
very good choice.
but something that you haven't read. Yeah, I've never read Ulysses either. I know I need to before.
Okay, we'll both be reading Ulysses and
There, we can-
writing nothing.
Writing nothing. Oh, forever. Are you reading something you're enjoying right now, by any chance?
Oh, I just finished Elizabeth Strout's new book, Tell Me Everything.
Tell me.
And I just love her. She's just
Love it.
a wonderful writer. And I'm always sorry when I finish the book. It's like,
Yeah.
wait a minute. So yeah, I just finished that. It was very, very good.
I love that. And she writes a little bit the way you described. I heard her speak once. She writes scenes. And then she said she puts all of her completed, actually on piece, she prints them and puts the papers with all the completed scenes in one place in her office. And after a while, when she thinks the stack looks tall enough, she thinks there's a book in there. And then she starts laying them out on the floor and putting them in order.
I've done that method too. There was one time, I think it was definitely with Replacement Child, where I had things on index cards. It wasn't the whole scene, but it would, give you, I had a title for it and I knew what it was. And I did plaster them up on my walls to figure out where they fit, where they should be. In the
Oh, that
book.
sounds cool.
But I didn't know that about Elizabeth Strout. And I met her once at a lecture also. And so that's interesting.
It is interesting. And once I heard her say that, I thought, oh, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Because really all of her books since Amy and Isabel have been like that. They're episodic, almost
Episodic, yeah.
almost a short story collection, but not
Yeah.
they all fit
Yeah,
together.
and I love the way she did that. Have you read this book, Tell Me Everything?
I've read everything she's ever written.
So very much like that. It's, stories.
Yeah, it's absolutely fantastic. So yeah, I
Great.
know you said you're not in the middle of a project now, but is there a project in your future, or are you just waiting to see?
I'm not sure. I'll have to wait and see if I have anything to say. But yeah, no, I'm not looking at anything right on the horizon at the moment.
Yeah.
Short things. I write short things on Substack sometimes.
Oh, you're on Substack?
Yeah, it's just my name, Judy Mandel.
Okay.
On
Okay.
there.
Yeah, I'm coming to like Substack. There's a lot of variety on there.
There is.
Well, Judy, it's been so much fun to talk with you. Thank you so much for joining me today on Lit Garden at booktrib.com. I've enjoyed it, and I loved both of your books. The story of your family is such an astonishing story, and you tell it so well with so much compassion and intelligence and love. You've done a beautiful job, and I really hope you're happy with the result. Would you want to share with our audience where they can find out more about you and where they can find your books?
Sure. It's really been a pleasure talking to you. And really thank you for having me. It's easy to find me, judymandel.com. So it's JUDYMANDEL.com. And that you can find everything about me there.
One stop.
One stop.
That's great.